Iraq's defeat in 1991 at the hands of a massive U.S.-led coalition did not bring closure to the Gulf War. Instead, it planted the seeds for a far more controversial and devastating conflict that would erupt 12 years later. Because while the bombs stopped falling in February 1991, the political, economic, and psychological war against Saddam Hussein's regime never truly ended. And what followed was a slow-burning crisis shaped by mistrust, fear, miscalculation, and a world transformed by terrorism. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 687, a sweeping ceasefire agreement that demanded Iraq dismantle all chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons programs, destroy long-range missiles, accept intrusive weapons inspections, and pay reparations for the invasion of Kuwait, while comprehensive economic and military sanctions would remain in place until full compliance could be verified. These weapons, chemical gas, biological agents, and nuclear capabilities were grouped under a chilling new phrase that would dominate global politics for the next decade: weapons of mass destruction. During the war itself, coalition forces had trained extensively for chemical warfare because Saddam Hussein had already demonstrated his willingness to use such weapons during the Iran-Iraq War and against Kurdish civilians. And intelligence revealed that Iraq possessed thousands of chemical munitions and had pursued biological weapons as well. Yet despite preparing these weapons during the conflict, Saddam ultimately chose not to deploy them against coalition troops, a decision that would later fuel dangerous ambiguity about whether Iraq still possessed them. After the war, UN inspectors uncovered evidence of a previously hidden Iraqi nuclear enrichment program, shocking many in Washington and reinforcing suspicions that Saddam had never been honest about the true extent of his weapons ambitions. Some American officials, including President George H.W. Bush, privately considered removing Saddam from power, but strong international opposition and the desire to stabilize a post-Cold War world pushed the United States toward a strategy of containment rather than regime change, with Bush emphasizing that American troops would not remain permanently stationed in the Gulf and that international cooperation, not unilateral conquest, would define the new global order. Even so, the United States and its allies remained militarily involved through the enforcement of no-fly zones over northern and southern Iraq to protect Kurds and Shia populations from Saddam's repression, while sanctions strangled Iraq's economy, restricting oil exports and blocking imports that could have dual civilian and military uses, a policy that devastated agriculture, healthcare, and infrastructure and contributed to widespread disease and malnutrition, with estimates of civilian deaths reaching into the hundreds of thousands, figures that remain fiercely debated as critics argue the Iraqi regime manipulated conditions to generate international sympathy. Throughout the 1990s, Iraq claimed it had destroyed all prohibited weapons, but inspectors were unable to verify these claims due to missing documents, incomplete disclosures, and persistent obstruction, leading to mounting frustration and accusations of deception. And under President Bill Clinton, the United States doubled down on containment while allowing limited oil sales under the Oil for Food program to alleviate humanitarian suffering. Tensions exploded in 1998 when Iraq refused inspectors access to sensitive sites, such as presidential palaces, accusing them of espionage for the United States and Israel, a charge later shown to have some basis in reality, prompting Saddam to expel inspectors entirely, which triggered Operation Desert Fox, a 4-day U.S.-British bombing campaign targeting suspected weapons facilities and military infrastructure, while Clinton signed the Iraq Liberation Act, making regime change official U.S. policy.
Although Russia, China, France, and several Arab states condemned the strikes and pushed to ease sanctions, motivated in part by oil interests, by the year 2000, Iraq was slowly recovering economically. Oil revenues were rising, and U.S. intelligence assessed that Saddam's grip on power was secure and that he was rebuilding his international standing, a conclusion that would soon be overtaken by events far beyond the Middle East. In January 2001, George W. Bush entered the White House with a focus on domestic policy, but everything changed on September 11, 2001, when coordinated terrorist attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and shattered America's sense of security, forcing the Bush administration into a posture of permanent emergency as intelligence agencies identified al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, as the culprit, and U.S. forces invaded Afghanistan within weeks. In this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, attention turned quickly to Iraq, as officials raised the possibility that a regime with a history of WMD development might share catastrophic weapons with terrorists, even though no clear link between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda could be established, and experts noted that the secular Iraqi regime and the Islamist extremists were ideological enemies. Still, the unprecedented scale of 9/11, combined with anthrax attacks and public anxiety, made the argument that Iraq could pose an existential threat politically potent, and in his 2002 State of the Union address, Bush labeled Iraq part of an axis of evil, accusing it of pursuing nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and supporting terror, rhetoric that drove his approval ratings to historic highs, even as intelligence agencies struggled to substantiate the claims. Despite weak evidence, public belief in Iraqi involvement in 9/11 surged, and in October 2002, Congress authorized the use of force, setting the stage for war as the administration framed Iraq as a test case for a new approach to security rooted in preemption rather than deterrence. At the center of the U.S. case was the assertion that Iraq had violated the 1991 ceasefire by expelling inspectors and concealing weapons programs, a claim that resonated with allies like Britain, prompting Prime Minister Tony Blair and Secretary of State Colin Powell to urge a return to the United Nations, resulting in Resolution 1441, which gave Iraq a final chance to comply but did not authorize force. Saddam accepted inspectors back, and teams led by Hans Blix and Mohammed el-Baradi scoured suspected sites, often guided by U.S. intelligence, yet they found no weapons of mass destruction, raising a paradox that haunted the debate. How could there be absolute certainty of weapons' existence, but zero knowledge of their location? Under immense pressure to prevent another surprise attack after 9/11, U.S. intelligence agencies leaned heavily on ambiguous and reliable sources, including defectors with personal agendas, most notably an Iraqi exile known as Curveball, whose fabricated claims about mobile biological labs were accepted despite skepticism from German intelligence, while British assertions that Iraq sought uranium from Niger were later exposed as forgeries. Inside Washington, intelligence analysis became fragmented and politicized, with rival offices promoting worst-case interpretations, and although some officials warned that evidence was unverified, the administration presented it publicly as fact, culminating in Colin Powell's dramatic February 2003 presentation to the UN, which featured intercepted conversations and satellite images that appeared damning but convinced few international experts, including Blix, who noted that the intelligence lacked weight and clarity. Beneath the surface, a powerful ideological current also shaped events, as neoconservative officials and thinkers argued that American military dominance should be used unilaterally to reshape the Middle East, remove hostile regimes, secure strategic resources, and promote a version of liberal democracy aligned with U.S. interests, viewing 9/11 as the catalytic shock needed to overcome public hesitation and establish a pro-American Iraq that could transform the region, protect Israel, reduce reliance on Saudi Arabia, and ensure access to oil, all while underestimating the costs and complexities of occupation. These ideas fed into what became known as the Bush Doctrine, which rejected Cold War containment in favor of preventive war, asserting the right to strike adversaries before threats fully materialized, a stance critics saw as undermining international law and the UN system, even as supporters argued it was a necessary response to a world of shadowy terrorist networks and rogue states. Yet Iraq was not merely a passive victim of these forces, because Saddam Hussein's own decisions played a critical role in bringing about the invasion, as he adopted a strategy of deliberate ambiguity regarding WMDs to deter Iran, Israel, and